Want to expand the reach of your content? Start a podcast, feature industry experts on your show, and leverage the influence and reach of your guests to grow your brand. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy with Sweetfish Media. Guys, I've got with me today Andrea Dumont, who is Senior Vice President of Marketing and Business Development at Globalization Partners. Andrea, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. Thank you for having me.
I love it. It's a very enthusiastic answer. Sometimes I'm the one bringing all the sunshine, but I got a feeling today it won't be so one-sided. So Andrea is going to be talking to us today about pipeline growth, which I know you guys are excited about. And they put up some pretty big, some really impressive numbers when it comes to this exponential growth that they saw themselves and were able to help some other folks achieve. So I'm excited to dig into that for you guys. But before we get to all of that, Andrea, I would love it if you would just give us a little bit of background on yourself and what you and the folks at Globalization Partners have been up to these days.
Absolutely. We'd be thrilled to do that. So I've been with Globalization Partners for just about 3 years, and I've been in the B2B and B2C marketing tech area for over 20 years. And it's been a fascinating ride to see all the changes that have gone on across the marketing industry in that time. At Globalization Partners, what we focus on is helping organizations expand internationally into a new country. So, for example, if you want to test out a market and put a few salespeople in that market before you fully commit and build a office in that market, we work with you to kind of get those people hired and set them up to succeed in that country. And we do this all by our technology, which is called our Global Expansion Platform. So it is an incredibly exciting time when you really look at global citizenship and a global footprint across the world. And that's why our business has been booming. And it definitely goes into the pipeline growth we'll talk about.
Yes. I love that. Because here's what happened, right? Most of us who are not in the business that you're in, we engage with at the consumer level, right? The results of the kind of work that you do. So that's one of my favorite parts of getting to sit down and have this conversation with you, is getting to hear about, what actually goes into this thing that you do that makes the world smaller in a way, that brings people together and gives so many people access to each other. Right. So I don't know.
Well, it's so true. Right. So all of a sudden you don't have to hire in the city that you're in. You can find the talent wherever it exists around the world. And it all of a sudden opens you up to a totally new talent base. And on top of that, a lot of different opinions, right? Because you're looking at people that may have different opinions from a cultural perspective, be able to help you understand what the uniqueness can be around a messaging point, if you will, across the world. So all of a sudden, again, it just opens up. There's talent everywhere. And there's absolutely no reason that employers can't really engage with that talent today.
Man, what an exciting time. So a lot of folks who listen to the show will know that the Sweetfish Media team is actually a 100% remote team. And we have folks who work with us from all over the world. And so you are speaking my language. And I'm on the team of anybody that's advancing that initiative. But to the matter at hand of this pipeline growth, y'all, get yourselves ready. Let me tell you this number, right? We're talking about driving 132% pipeline growth, right? You probably think that's impossible, but Andrea is going to tell us exactly how that is possible to have achieved this rocket ship growth. Andrea, give us an overview of what it is we're talking about here, and then we'll dig in.
Yeah, I got to tell you, it's been fascinating to kind of develop this growth. I mean, we have increased our customer base by more than 50% in the last 6 months. And when you think about that, it's not only just engaging from a prospect perspective, but then it's onboarding these people and making sure they're happy customers so they continue to work with us over time. And so when you think about that, the marketing cycle for us really engages all the way from prospecting to truly sunsetting a client. So we exist across the entire spectrum of acquisition, onboarding, and then eventually, if they decide to move on, we offboard them. And we have to make sure that we delight the customer all through those stages. So as a result of that, the marketing team here really goes very deep into the pipeline. We are not just a top of the funnel team. So we have a team of approximately 40 people, and we have hubs in India, in Mexico City, in Boston, and in San Diego. And we really focus on finding the right talent, no matter where they live in the world, to help us really drive that demand into the pipeline. So first and foremost, it was to build that team to really understand how we can very quickly and effectively qualify and understand the messages that the market needs.
Mm-hmm.
The second piece that we really focused on was testing. I mean, everybody, I'm sure you've done a lot of stories around this in terms of testing and iterating, right? Because when you're talking to different personas, you should be testing, and whether it be headlines, whether it be different ways of communications, anything of that sort. We test all the time. And that has been able to create a systematic approach, if you will, for how we capture messages that work. And also, from a marketing perspective, because we've been testing and been so successful in that, that allows us to get that executive support and allows us to continue to increase our marketing budget, which is amazing because that's what everybody wants, right?
Yeah.
And so by being able to test and prove out results, we've been able to increase that. And I think the third piece that we really focused on is a lot of modeling. And I know, particularly when you're starting a small market organization, people will say, my goodness, I just don't have the resources to deal with modeling. That is a wish that I could possibly do. We've taken baby steps, and that's all you really need to do to start this. So we have been working on just looking at the thematic approach around our conversion rates. We've been looking at lookalikes, if you will, in terms of what our ideal customer profile is. There are things that you can do as a marketing organization that doesn't require a full-time analyst or a BI group. And I would encourage people to do that because the more modeling you do, the more successful you're going to be as you test and iterate.
Yeah, no, I mean, you gave us so much. So build, test, improve. And then that's when you put yourself in a position where you'll be able to do this projection modeling. I just kind of want to make sure that folks are keying in on this. If there are things that Andrea is listing that you're thinking, hey, maybe that won't work for me, or I wouldn't be able to get the internal support. Just remember that all these things that are being suggested are to the goal of driving this 132% pipeline growth. So she's telling you it's possible. I believe this woman. Go ahead.
And not only that, I mean, we started 3 years ago with 2 people in marketing. So I hear people when they say to me, there's no way we could possibly do this. You have, they look at it now and say, my goodness, you have a 40-person team. Well, it did not start that way. We really had to build out over the last several years and prove our effectiveness. And so my recommendation when I talk to folks or I mentor people in my network is focus first and foremost where you can prove out your direct impact on the business. That typically starts with pipeline development. Then once you've got that buy-in and the additional budget that comes with it, then you can focus more on the communications and the brand and other things that are just as equally as important, but you can demonstrate at least the pipeline piece first.
Right. God, that's such good advice, because I know I talk to marketers every day that there are marketing teams out there who regularly are having to sort of justify their work because the idea from sort of other teams, sales teams in particular, is that a lot of that work is fluffy or doesn't have this kind of pipeline driving muscle that you're talking about building. And that's, one of the things that I want to talk about. Your title, it's in your title, right? Your title being the VP of marketing and business development, having those two things from the very beginning married together versus being focused on just the marketing or just the business development, I think is another reason why you guys have been able to have that success. And so I want you to talk a little bit about some ideas that folks can put into practice now to align their organization's marketing and sales function to that end of marketing and business development at the same time, and sort of proving your bottom line muscle.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I think, the first thing I always talk to folks about is, depending on where you are in your journey of a company, whether you're a startup, a growth company, or more established, you always need to know of where you need to put your budget and efforts at the stage the company's at. So for me, when we talked about starting up and having two people, for us, our efforts and budget were focused on pipeline. For more established companies that perhaps need to focus on awareness, okay, well, that's where your budget and money should be spent. But you as a marketer need to do the research and understand what stage your company's at so you can make the proper recommendation. The first and foremost thing I always talk to folks about is, once you have that information and things you can put into practice, is having the right marketing infrastructure in place. And that is people, process, and tools. There's been a lot of studies. I think Gartner just came out with one as well about how CMOs and IT are more connected than ever in terms of making sure that marketing has the tools in place to be successful in terms of being able to do the measurement that they need. So infrastructure is critical. Don't overlook that, because it is something that's going to allow you to be successful. I think along with that infrastructure, the other thing I would recommend to folks is being very focused on metrics and choose revenue generating tactics that move the business forward. Again, this goes back to being able to impact your pipeline and being able to go back to the exec team and talk about how things performed and how they eventually made its way down to the pipeline and affected bottom line revenue. And I know it's a little bit more difficult when people are doing what you mentioned, like soft things, and soft things could be brand or communications. I would argue that those things are critically important and there are ways to measure them. But from an executive perspective, pipeline is what they look at. So make sure that you understand how to communicate up the success. And I think finally, and again, this is so simple, but it's not as easy as it seems, is audience identification. We have done a tremendous amount of work on the 4 key personas that we work on, and we're constantly refining them because we're constantly learning about them from our campaigns that we do, from events that we do, different ways they like to digest information. It is not, okay, I've done my personas, push them to the side, they're done. They should be evolving and ever developing types of materials so you truly get more customized as you build out your programs and communications.
Yeah, no, I've seen more often than not the case be that piece was left as, sort of an afterthought. Now, this is me speaking from, I've not been on ever on marketing teams. I came from a sales background, but I was always very curious, very interested in how these marketing functions played into what I was doing as a salesperson. And a lot of the time, this is why that alignment piece is so important, because marketing can set up a really good infrastructure, but if the salespeople aren't bought in on it, or the sales team isn't, doesn't understand it, then it's going to be labeled less effective than it actually is. And I also want to go ahead and agree with you that those so-called soft things are critical. A lot of what I do in my work when I work with marketers has to do with those soft things, and I've seen it firsthand drive business in as important a way as any of these pipeline things that we've been talking about. Shout out to the marketers, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So some of the other things that I just want to make sure folks get from you while I have your wealth of knowledge here in front of me have to do with some more tips that companies who are listening to this, or folks who represent companies who are listening to this, can walk away from. I know we've talked about, building the team in, the initial point, building the team, testing and proving, and then having the projection model. And then you've just given us a lot when it comes to how teams can set up the infrastructure and be really, really tactical about those revenue generating sort of muscle measures and things like that. What else? What else can, folks who are saying, hey, I'm wanting to just make sure I'm putting my best foot forward where this stuff is concerned. I want to hurt 132% pipeline growth. Give us the last little tidbits on this.
Sure. There's a couple of things. I mean, again, every organization is going to be different based on the industry they're in, or B2B or B2C or whatever. But I think there's some consistencies. I think the first thing I would say is consistent across all marketing platforms is you've got to know your data. And for me, the most necessary position for me was always a marketing analyst and or marketing operations. And I say that because they're the folks that are looking at your data across marketing and sales systems, and they're drawing pertinent insights for our go-to-market strategy. So as you build out your team, look at those two types of positions for you to start with, because they're going to give you the foundation you need, right, to go to market successfully. Mm-hmm. I think second, whenever I've worked in organizations, whether they have small or large marketing sales teams, we are a single team. We work collectively together. I work so closely with my sales leaders and end up actually feel like sometimes I'm more in sales than I am in marketing half the time, because we have to have a single goal and jointly defined success, if you will, and alignment on the pipeline and the metrics for that. Find a way to do that. Do not let marketing be kind of an afterthought or sort of off to the side. You've got to make sure that you've got that connection with sales. And by doing so, you'll be more successful.
For sure. I like this piece about holding mandatory meetings between marketing and sales. Yeah. And because I don't know why more organizations don't do that. It seems like a no-brainer. But what happens is the leadership of those teams are meeting, but the members of those teams, the individual contributors of those teams are not. And so there still remains this disconnect a lot of the time. So I think that's one of my favorite sort of takeaways from a lot of the things that you brought to this conversation. Any more thoughts on that piece?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. We start the week with meetings with the entire marketing and sales team. So the sales reps all the way up through sales management and marketing management, because we make sure we're connected on what's going out this week, whether it be new content or new advertising or just a new event that we're doing. And that way everybody's in sync with the top of the funnel kind of materials and then what the bottom of the funnel is looking like. And then secondly, we have another meeting towards the end of the week, which is just marketing management and sales management. And we do that because that's where we're talking a little bit more specific about the strategy and the goals and where we need to be by the end of the quarter to hit our numbers. So for me, it aligns the teams together very well, because we're able to have that more strategic discussion and that more detailed, specific discussion about pipeline activity. So please do connect with your sales leaders and make sure that marketing and sales connection is available.
100%. And it makes this next piece even easier, right? If what it's effective to do, right? I don't even think anybody would argue against this point, right? Is to nurture your ideal customers and devote more resources to the ones that fit your ideal customer profile. If we're doing that as two sort of separate strategies, a marketing, strategy and a sales strategy to do that, then we're missing that first piece that you talked about at the beginning, which is having this working as one team and sort of telling one cohesive story across the organization. Yeah. So once you get that alignment from these meetings and the way that you talk about a lot of the things that you mentioned, then it becomes easier to nurture those customers throughout their journey with the organization. Right?
Well, because and that's the thing. I agree. Marketing should not just be top of the funnel. You should be the entire journey. And by collaborating with sales, you're going to be more effective that way and get more ammunition, if you will, throughout the entire life cycle.
Yep. And that's what everybody wants. This has been, I usually tell folks this offline, but I got to tell you this right now. I come into these conversations with two major goals, right? And, the first is to make sure that I am delivering, that I'm very selective about the folks that I have on the show, and that I'm delivering a high level of value to those folks that are listening, because people take it seriously. They're taking, their lunch break or their drive into work, and they're listening to this and they're trying to get something that they can use. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show. And I think you definitely delivered on that The second major factor is, are we going to have fun? All right. Are we going to have a conversation where there's going to be, passion and poetry about these things that typically aren't associated with that. People aren't talking about, passion when they talk about pipeline, not in the traditional way, but I think we've done that. I think we've driven home this point that, there is so much fulfillment to be gained from getting this stuff right. And at least on my end, it's been fun. But the third dimension that I like to get from these conversations that I just want to thank you for right here is when I get to learn something, right? When I get to take off my podcaster hat and, just be a student and learn something. So you brought all three of those things today. I'm really, really grateful. I have to, at this point of the show, ask where all that stuff comes from. So I've been picking your brain to see what I can get out of it. It's time, Andrea, for you to tell me what you've been putting in it. So talk to us about a learning resource that you have engaged with that is either informing your approach or that's just got you excited these days.
Yeah, it's a great question. I am an avid reader. I read and listen to podcasts constantly. And so I do love Harvard Business Review, HBR's Insights. And it is a fantastic model just to listen about business as a whole and understand how potentially you can fit into different models. The second thing that I do from a motivational perspective is there's something called Friday Forward. And Friday Forward is an email that goes out every Friday that talks about an emotional connection of learning around how you connect with your customers and how you really work both internally and externally to get excited about your brand, to get excited about data, which I know can be dry at times, but I have learned to love it, and really understand the concepts of how to be a really good manager, an effective listener, and a really effective leader. So those are the two things right now that I would recommend.
Thank you so much. Friday Forward is now on the list.
Love it.
So I know, Andrea, that like me, other folks listening have become fast fans of yours and are going to want to keep up with you. Let us know how folks can connect with you.
Yep. Best way actually is to hit me on LinkedIn. So just look for my profile, Andrea Dumont, go for it. Send me a message, send me any quick questions, and I'd be happy to answer them and be happy to connect. And I would love to hear from everybody.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andrea. I know there's so much that we didn't even get to dig into today, so I guess we'll just have to have you on again. Thank you so much for being on the show. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.